like denying detainees habeas corpus the way we're doing in Bagram, like the idea that the president has the authority to assassinate people around the world without any oversight, that are all policies that the Obama administration and Democrats have now embraced for reason, and I think Republicans are right, like you, to stand up and say, we were slandered all these years by Democrats who have now adopted these very policies. And I do think the Democrats who support those things and who say, well, maybe Obama now saw some things that he didn't know before now that he's president and he gets intelligence briefings, or now he has responsibility for national security because he's no longer just a candidate and can't rail against these things irresponsibly. I think the Democrats owe George Bush and Dick Cheney an apology for the things that they said about those policies that they have now embraced. I mean,
I think there's a lot. I concur. I concur. But it's also true. But wait a minute. It's also true that in 1998 and 1999, Democrats were for those things. That Bill Clinton signed authorization to assassinate bin Laden, and Bill Clinton engaged in extraordinary rendition. In fact, he invented it, or his administration did. So maybe what happened here is the Democrats went on a kind of...
That's not quite true.
The Democrats went on a detour.
The rendition programs, but it is true that there is some continuum. But you yourself said that there were some pretty significant changes in the wake of 9/11 that distinguish it from what Bill Clinton was doing.
But let me put it this way: Bill Clinton in 1998 was more. If there's a continuum from Cheney in 2003 to Kerry in 2004, Bill Clinton was not with Kerry in 2004. He was on a continuum. Bill Clinton, vintage 1998, and this is how by the way, this is how the American government gets things right. I mean, that you say, well, maybe we overshot maybe we were too panicked in 2002 and 2003 and did some things we shouldn't. Okay, well, course correct. But it's also true that this candidate who said, Barack Obama, who said all these things in 2006 and 2007, lodged all these accusations, he overshot. And now he's more in the main course, and we could have a little bit more of a steady consensus between the parties on how we defend the national security of the United States.
That begs the question. I mean, the mere fact that a president runs for office based on certain policies that he then abandons when he's president has many potential causes. Maybe he's too politically scared to follow through on those policies. Maybe there are powerful factions standing in his way that he's not willing to challenge and take on. Maybe he has other priorities.
Stop. Say your first thing. What's he scared of?
It could be the case that he realizes those policies are wrong. It could be the case that he was right as a candidate. Those policies are wrong, and he's just too inept or cowardly or unprincipled or whatever to follow through on the commitments.
But the thing you have to posit, Glenn, if you're going to reprimand Obama as cowardly or say he got scared or whatever, what is posited there is he's not scared of nothing, right? He's scared of something, and what he's scared of is that he would find himself, if he's stuck by what he said then, on the wrong side of the country that elected him. So when you say he's broken his covenant with the American people,
I just don't know how. I don't know how it's possible to say that when he won the election, not mentioning these policies as an ancillary aspect of his candidacy, but featuring them as a cornerstone.
Okay,
so it's extremely impossible to convince me that had he followed through on closing Guantanamo or giving due process to terrorist suspects, that the same country that elected him on the promise of doing that would have suddenly turned against him.
Let's give him credit, but give him credit for knowing his business. And maybe he is somebody who knows something about the process by which he got elected. Said, I got to, that closed Guantanamo due process for terrorist stuff was fine in the primary, but it hurt me in the general. I was elected in the general because the economy was terrible and unemployment was high and incomes weren't rising and people wanted health care reform. But this was my biggest point of vulnerability. And now if I do this as president, I'm going to be cooked. So as president, I'm going to jettison all those things I said in the Democratic primary to assuage a portion of American public opinion. As president, I'm going to speak to America.
But polls disprove that. I mean, huge majorities, before he abandoned it, were in favor of closing Guantanamo. Huge majorities were in favor of restoring civil liberties at the expense of security before he abandoned that. Huge majorities were actually in favor of investigating Bush crimes until Obama abandoned that. So
here's where you need to be tougher on yourself. I'm sorry. Here's where you need to be tougher on yourself. You need to ask yourself, am I calling on the president to be principled, or am I calling on the president to be popular? Because what you're saying is, you could do all these things that Glenn Greenwald that all the political professionals in the Democratic Party tell you not to do, that your own instincts tell you not to do, and I am telling you how to connect with the American public.
No,
I'm also telling you how to be principled.
The things that you promised that you were going to do when you stood up repeatedly, not just in front of Democratic voters, but in front of the American electorate, and swore that you would do and said you believed in, and the change that you were intended to bring. And I know some people might think this is reasonable, but I actually expect you to follow through on those. I think that you ought to be held to those. I don't think that it's saying anything more than that.
Why do you think he chose not to do? I mean, who's he scared of if he's not doing it? Rush Limbaugh?
Well, no. I mean, I think that
Rush Limbaugh has like 2 million listeners.
I think in order to stand up, for example, to the permanent national security state that we were just talking about, or the permanent intelligence community. It used to be that Dwight Eisenhower warned 40 years ago that military-industrial complex was so powerful that
why is he afraid of the permanent?
Democratically elected
They
president.
work for him. He promotes them. He hires. He fires. Why is he scared of them?
No,
because they connect to something. That's what the country is.
It doesn't work that way. They're permanent. They're permanent part of the structure. They have power. They have powers independent of the president. I mean, that's not a controversial proposition. That presidents have a very difficult time confronting the military establishment, confronting the CIA, confronting the intelligence world. There are all kinds of things. Those factions in Washington, just like there's a lobbyist faction in Washington and a corporate faction in Washington that has as much power in some senses more power than the president. All these things have a huge cost to take these factions on and to defy them and to do it and to do what they insist not be done. And
if the reports are correct,
courage to do it, and you need to pay the price to do it. And if you're not, you won't.
If the reports are correct, the professional military did not want to do this raid. They thought it was too risky. They wanted to drop a big bomb on the thing and leave a crater.
But they have wanted to stay in Afghanistan. They did want to escalate in Afghanistan.
But they didn't want to do this thing so he's able to take them on, and they do work for him, and he hires and he fires and he promotes. But if you're saying so on the thing that is bugging you, which is that and he seems personally to have made the decision. What I want is to have gunmen in that house looking at bin Laden in the face and then killing him on the spot. That's what I want. You guys want to do it from 30,000 feet. I want it up close and personal. He's got, partly that may reflect, I think, his moral fiber, that he has, the feelings that a lot of people do, that is the right thing to do. But it also may reflect a sense of, that Glenn Greenwald's reading of American public opinion here may not be as astute as all of that.
There are times when Obama has defied the military and intelligence establishments. One of the most noble instances where he did it, where he really provoked their outrage and anger, was when he released the Bush-era OLC memos detailing the torture techniques that had been authorized by the Justice Department and had been used by the CIA, and the CIA was absolutely furious about that. There are times, and the example that you just gave, there's also they had reluctance, more so than he did, to get involved in Libya. So I'm not saying he's never able or never willing to challenge those factions. I'm saying that in order to do it, you have to pay a price for it. It's often very difficult. You can't always do it. And I think it's easier to do it in terms of when you're the commander-in-chief ordering specific operational directives, like I want you to go in and send Navy SEALs in, as opposed to obliterating the building, versus essentially changing the general direction of America's war policy or its counterterrorism policies away from what it had been over the last decade, or even, as you point out, longer, into a fundamentally different direction. Those kind of changes require real fights and a paying of a price that I just don't think he was willing to pay, assuming he ever believed in those things in the first place, which I think is a big if as well, whether he was just cynically adopting those positions for political gain, as opposed to actually believing them. That's a huge if too. You need to first believe in them, and then you need to be willing to pay the price to fight for them. And I think it's a very open question on all of those issues, whether he even believed in them in the first place.
A discussion I've often had with some of my more conservative friends, more conservative than me, is I always thought, and I didn't think specifically of you in this regard, but it would I think you would have had an interesting reaction to it, is when Dick Cheney stepped forward in, I think it was 2009, delivered those blistering series of speeches about the Obama administration. I always thought it would have been at least funnier and maybe more accurate if he had stepped forward and said, during the campaign, a lot of hot things were said and a lot of accusations get thrown. But now the campaign is over, I want to say, welcome to the club. And we are, I'm looking at what this young president is doing, and I'm seeing more continuity than disagreement. And I want to say, I fully endorse him. I wrap my arms around him, and I see him as a leader and successor. And that would have been hilarious.
No, what's interesting about that, though, is you've really seen an evolution in how even the hardest core conservatives, national security conservatives like Dick Cheney, talk about Obama. It is true in 2009, it was just reflexive that people on the right attack a Democratic president for being soft on terror, soft on national security, jeopardizing the nation. It's just almost like an instinct, like a reflex. But Cheney actually did give an interview just like, I think 3 months ago or so, in which he basically said what you just, said it would be funny if he did say, which is, look, I mean, it is true that in the beginning I was criticizing Obama a lot, but I think he's really come around and has seen that a lot of these policies that he was attacking, that we adopted, he's seen that they've actually turned out to be right, and there has been much more of a continuity, and I praise the president for that. Michael Hayden has said that, who was a harsh critic of the president early on. The Heritage Foundation has said, he's not just Bush light, he's Bush on these policies. And when for even Dick Cheney to come out and say, there is now more continuity than there was, and he's obviously seen that we're right about some things, and I give him some credit for that, that to me is a pretty compelling indication of just how far astray Obama the president is from Obama the candidate. And you think that's a great thing, and I think it's not a great thing. But
maybe that shows
even in that's pretty revealing.
That the government, that this is sort of what we want. We want to have our leaders bashing each other over where taxes should be and where spending should be, and how we should fund health care, and how big the park should be, and whether there should be logging on all of those kinds of things. But we want to have some consistent idea of the national interests of the American state that continue election after election and that maintain the security of the country. That's certainly what I think of as the system working.
Right, and I think what the system working means is adopting policies that are effective and legal and ethical and in conformity with what we say we are and what our goals are. And so the fact that both parties get together and agree on something, both parties got together and agreed more or less on the Iraq War doesn't mean it's a good policy. I think you have to look at the individual policy, and I don't think those policies. I think Obama was right in what he said about those things during the campaign, which is why I wanted him to be president. And I think he's wrong now to have abandoned those. But unless, I don't know, we're at the end of this hour. Do you have other things you want to?
No, I think we've covered a lot of territory at blistering speed. And this time it was your dogs who were barking, I was happy to see.
I don't know, I'm going to deny that. I'll conduct an investigation and see if that's true.
All right, bye-bye.
All right, David, talk to you.